daughter still brings it up. She had nightmares. She constantly checks to make sure the door's locked. She doesn't want to sleep alone. It terrified her. I mean, it scared me. It was, again, like a loud, deep, like you could almost feel it, like a snarl and then a growl. And I've had large dogs. I'm used to that. It was, I mean, way different than a dog. So I don't know what it was. Again, that's in Milford, Michigan, about 2 years ago. And I would say it was probably 7 o'clock at night. I was listening to one of your other shows, and it kind of reminded me of that. And she still brings it up all the time, my daughter. It kind of traumatized her. I just thought I'd give you a call and let you know. Thanks. Bye.
Thank you, caller. I think I know exactly what you heard that evening. And given this town's proximity to the town of Ann Arbor, our caller may have heard the Wolverines' quarterback of the week hyperventilating over thoughts of facing a Buckeye defense. Yeah, that was a football joke. Go Bucks. But I'm a Hayes from Ohio, so it's my duty to rag on that team up north. Sorry, guys. But in all seriousness, Michigan is dogman country. And you may remember the song that I shared just a few seasons back, The Legend of the Dogman by Steve Cook.
In 57, a man of the cloth found claw marks on an old church door. The newspaper said they'd been made by a dog. He'd have had to stood 7'4". In 67, a van load of hippies told a park ranger named Quinlan they'd been awakened in the night by a scratch at the window. There was a dog man looking in and grinning. In 77, there were screams in the night near the village of Bel Air. Could have been a bobcat, could have been the wind. Nobody looked up there.
The place of origin for this story, within the song, is only a few hours from Milford. So hey, maybe our caller found himself a genuine dogman. But full disclosure, the song is part of an April Fool's gag by a Michigan radio station. I know, it's a bummer. Oh, and caller, I should mention that sending your daughter ahead wasn't the best of ideas. Not only does your daughter's size make her a target for predators, both known and unknown, but running also triggers a predatory response. Pick her up and put her on your shoulders. The point is to look as big as possible. But at any rate, thanks again for the entry. Now guys, if you've exhausted your supply of TV and film, blown through the entire Netflix collection, perhaps consider pledging to our Patreon campaign to get access to Monsters Among Us Beyond. 2 new shows a month plus additional bonus content, not to mention the 30+ episodes that I have backlogged. Just hit up patreon.com, search for Monsters Among Us, or simply hit up the link in tonight's show notes. Now this evening's next entry is Erica's, and she's got a story that will jump right out at you.
Hi, my name is Erica, and I'm from Texas. I've been binge listening to you, accidentally stumbled across the podcast, and it's great. It helps really hear from other people who've had strange experiences that you just can't explain. I'm originally from Roswell, New Mexico, and so I'm not a stranger to strange things. My children and I and my husband, on the summers, we try to go to New Mexico and do some camping. And this time, we had chosen to go to Angel Fire, which is a place I had only been there maybe once as a child. We had a great time, and we had rented a house, and nothing crazy, a lot of fishing and a lot of fun. One of the things about Angel Fire are the night skies. They're absolutely beautiful. It's the mountains, they just open up, and you could see so many stars. On our last night, my children, my nephew was also with us, had asked if we could just go on an adventure to go stargazing. So we drove down this road, one of the main highways, and as we're driving past this lake, we see this very secluded playground, and the kids ask, "Hey, can we go ahead and swing under the stars?" So we pull up, and it's a pebble road, and the kids dart out of the car and go running straight for the swing set. My nephew says that he needs to go use the restroom. There's an outdoor restroom facility on the playground, and it's really dark. There's one light that lights up half of the playground, but the other half where the restroom is located is really, really dark. So my nephew goes to the door, and he pulls on it, and it's locked. He yells at me, and he says, "It's locked." As soon as he yells, and it was a loud, echoing yell, we're in the mountains, and so it was a really strong noise from his voice. And we start to hear kind of somebody throwing something at us. And as I mentioned, the road was made of pebbles, so it was clear that whatever was being thrown in our direction was small, like a pebble, very small. My nephew, he yells at my daughter and says, "Stop throwing rocks this way." And she says, "I'm not throwing them." And so she's running for the swing set, which is further out away from the light. My nephew starts to use the restroom facing the direction of the restroom, and we hear this loud thump. It sounded like something had fallen on a metal roof. So I look at the restroom facility, and the roof is metal. So obviously either a tree limb or something had fallen on top of it is what I had assumed. But seconds later, you hear something fall to the ground, and these pebbles, kind of like the noise that your feet make when they hit the pebbles. At that time, my daughter, as I mentioned, was running towards the furthest swing set, which happened to be right in the direction of where we're hearing these noises. And as I look at her and I'm trying to process everything, my husband's in the car pulling our baby out. So he hears the thump as well, and I see his head poke out of the car. We're all just kind of looking for it. But my daughter's reaction was so strange. She had her finger out, and she had her arm pulled out. She was pointing towards something, and she couldn't say anything, but she was trying. No words were coming out. She was just like, As she's doing that, she's moving her finger in the direction of something. And we can hear footsteps now on the ground, like it sounds like something is now running on the ground, and it's heading towards the tree line. And it's crazy talking about it. It looked like a kangaroo. And I know this sounds crazy. It looked like a kangaroo. It had the tail of a kangaroo, but it wasn't. It was scaly, and I couldn't make out the color because it was a couple feet away in this darker area. My daughter was so scared. She couldn't, as I mentioned, she couldn't speak. So I run over to her, and I shake her, and I say, "Run to the car." And I start screaming. And everybody, my nephew, everyone starts running to the car. My husband starts the car, and I'm the furthest one out at this time. I will never forget what this thing looked like, though. It was running on all twos at first, and then it went to fours. It went to four. It started running faster. It, as I mentioned, had a long tail, and it looked scaly. It didn't look like it had fur. Didn't look like it had any hair. Didn't have the features of a kangaroo from the face. In fact, it just had these big eyes, and I couldn't see anything else from it. There was a glare in the eyes, is all that I could pick up. It didn't look like it came from this planet. It looked like nothing I'd ever seen. It ran into the trees, and we lost sight of it. We packed up the kids quicker than quick, and we drove off. The night sky had given that area a lot of, it was glowing, and so the stars were so bright. It was absolutely the most terrifying moment I've ever had in my life. And my kids, they don't talk about it often, but once in a while when we mention it, in fact, for the last 2 years, we haven't even gone to New Mexico for our annual camping trip just because this really shook them up. it's something that I've always wanted to know if anyone has ever seen anything like this. I'm from New Mexico, so I know about Dulce Canyon. I know about experiments. I know about all that stuff that happens. And I know obviously about the aliens since I'm from Roswell, but I don't know what this was. And I've researched it and I can't find any information on a kangaroo-like creature. Thank you so much for your podcast. I appreciate for having an outlet to talk about things that you normally would never mention. It's definitely a comfortable platform, so thank you.
Thank you, Erica. When I think of a scaly, kangaroo-shaped creature, I immediately picture a dinosaur. If you remember back to Season 9, Episode 12, Jackie also told of a similar creature that she saw in Michigan. Her sighting resulted in mutilated livestock. Now, outside of a surviving dinosaur species, the possibility of which is near zero, I'm struggling to come up with a logical suspect. I first thought of a bird like an ostrich or an emu, but at least Erica's creature was reported to run on all fours. Birds do not have more than 2 legs. And last I checked, they also don't eat sheep. The only other logical thing I can think of is a bear with a skin disorder, like mange, that would result in severe hair loss and scabbing and scarring all over the body. And let me tell you how off-putting a hairless bear can be. Oddly enough, many appear blue or gray in color, and due to the creature's disorder, the skin would appear scaly. On top of that, injured or sick animals like that often prey on weak or domesticated animals, so that could explain why it mysteriously attacked the sheep. Now, I've linked to a few photos that show exactly what I'm talking about in the show notes, so hop on over and take a look. Of course, a black bear, which lives in both Michigan and New Mexico, can run on its hind legs for a varied period of time, which also helps to explain how Erica's creature began bipedally and then dropped down to all fours. This is merely a theory, however, a theory I came up with while editing the call, so maybe I'm way off. But off or not, like Erica said, if anyone out there has seen anything like this strange, scaly, kangaroo-type creature, give the hotline a call at 1-888-608-NIGHT. That's 1-888-608-6444. And as always, I'm accepting true paranormal stories of all kinds. Thank you again, Erica, for sharing your tale. Now, before we release the remaining beast, so to speak, I have one more UFO call I'd like to submit for your examination. So with that, I present to you a submission by BH in the state of Colorado.
Hi, I'm going to go by BH. I'm calling about a UFO experience that I had in the time frame of 1990 in Boulder, Colorado. My best friend and roommate had just graduated, and my other best friend, the three of us, we were going to have some dinner, have some beers, kind of celebrate because my best friend, I'm going to call him Anthony, he was going to move the next day to go to graduate school out of state. So we were going to celebrate kind of our last time together in school at the University of Colorado. We went out, we had a good time. It was a beautiful summer evening. You know, Colorado summers can be absolutely just stunning and beautiful, and the evenings can be fantastic. And we went out to a few areas on Pearl Street and up on the hill, and Anthony and I, we lived at the north side of the University of Colorado campus, not directly adjacent to it, but just north about a quarter of a mile of the campus. After we'd finished, going out, having some beers and some dinner, we were walking back to our apartment, and we were walking through campus, and there was a section of campus that at the time was under construction. There was a massive construction project to expand the recreation center to the size that it is now. It was much smaller at the time that I went to school there, but it's a huge facility now. As we got to that part of the campus where the recreation center sits and where this construction project sits, it's on the northeast corner of the campus in Boulder, right next to the football stadium. And they had just begun excavation. And as part of the excavation process, they lay down these weird mats that cut down erosion. And we were walking through this construction area. The campus is kind of up on a slight hill mesa above the rest of town. And it was a beautiful night, full just clear skies. And we were just shooting the breeze. And we were sitting down in this construction area on these mats, looking up at the sky and just, philosophizing about life and laughing and giving each other lots of crap. And I've always been a stargazer, and I was like looking for satellites, and it was a beautiful night to look for satellites. And most of the satellites that you see are traveling from a north to south pattern, and it makes it really easy. Satellites that actually hold the trajectory or the rotation of the Earth, you can't see it. It just looks like a star. But so we were looking for satellites, and they look just like a star that's cruising along. And we're talking, and, we saw a couple of satellites here and there. And then all of a sudden, there was this weird, coming from the north. We were laying on the mat facing the north. And all of a sudden, these three oval shapes, and they were completely dark. There were no flashing lights, none of that crap that you hear about with UFOs, where so, oh my God, I saw flashing lights, and, they were flashing around like a spinning frisbee and any of that stuff. These were just pure black shadows, egg shapes flying in a triangle pattern from north to south, and they were just cruising, just real steady, real quiet. They're flying from north to south. They weren't going incredibly fast, and that the altitude that they were flying at was probably, I don't know, maybe around 3,000 feet. University of Colorado was at a little over a mile high. And when these craft flew from north to south, they were blocking out the stars. So we knew that they were below at a much lower altitude than the stars. They weren't out in space. It was something I'd never seen before. I'd seen tons of satellites as a kid, and there's a few things that are interesting about this. If people look back a little bit in the history here, I'm dating myself, but the stealth fighter was actually not revealed fully publicly until during Desert Storm. And the pattern, dimension shape of an F-117 stealth is more of a triangle. These were a perfect oval. So they weren't anything like a stealth fighter. And if, they may have been some other military craft, but the other thing that was incredibly fascinating and actually scared the hell out of me was they were silent, completely silent. And I could tell how low they were, that if they were any other craft, they would have made some noise. And to this day, my two other best friends were still in contact. We still talk about that. And we actually did an exercise to see, okay, you write down what you saw, you write down what you saw, I'll write down what I saw. And just, so we didn't influence each other. And we all wrote the same descriptions. So, this was pre-stealth, pre-web. It wasn't pre-internet. It was pre-web. Didn't see a lot of the YouTube stuff. That was way before that. And I still think about it a lot to this day because it makes me wonder what, it expanded and just blew away any assumptions that I have about anything that goes on in this world. Pretty incredible. So anyway, that's my story. Thanks. Love the podcast. Love to support it. Keep up the great work, and love hearing the stories and your skepticism and devil's advocate approach on reviewing the stories. Thanks.
Thank you, BH. Given the description BH gave, it's hard for me not to picture the infamous tic-tac-toe UFO from the recently released jet surveillance video from the US military. If you recall, the craft received its name based on its resemblance of the candy breath mint, Tic Tacs. Pretty much the exact shape described by BH. So is it possible that there are more of these things, intelligently controlled by something or someone? Or, like Gabriel's call from earlier this evening, are we left guessing about what's overhead? Either way, thanks again, BH, for taking the time to share. Now, for the rest of those monsters I keep teasing you with. This next story is Chloe's, from the Lone Star State of Texas.
Hi Derek, it's Chloe from Texas. I'm calling in another one of my brother's experiences. He's given me permission to call in a few of his experiences. He's had quite a few, and unlike me, he really doesn't have a lot of interest in the paranormal. He kind of tries to stray from it, and seems like the more that he does that, the more experiences he has. But I digress. He's given me permission to call this one in. This one was from when we were kids. I wasn't with him during this experience. He was actually staying the night at one of his friends' homes. I believe they lived in like a mobile home, like a trailer house. And he was there with several other boys. I think they were about 12 or 13, right in there. They were, I think, middle school. And, you know, they were staying up, drinking Mountain Dew, playing video games, doing that kind of thing. And one of them happened to glance out the window and just saw something zoom by. He started trying to get the other boys' attention, and he was like, what was that? Did you guys see that? And they were like, no. But they all kind of went up to the window to look, and after a while it zoomed by again. And of course, this time they all just saw the blur, and they all started freaking out. They all started, oh my God, what was that? You know, just totally losing it. And so they're kind of looking for this thing, and they can't quite figure out what it is. They're thinking, maybe is it a deer? Is it a really fast dog? Is it a coyote? They can't figure out what it is. And it just starts circling the trailer super, super, super fast. And they said not only could they like see it zooming by, but they could hear it just whirring around the trailer super, super fast. And they said at a certain point they could almost feel it. And they're all screaming and freaking out. And, you know, the kids' parents come in and like, what's going on? And, you know, they only caught the tail end of whatever was happening. And they were like, what was that? And the kids, I don't know, something was outside. What was it? Is there a person out there? The parents, we didn't see anything, of course, right? Like in true Spielberg fashion, the parents saw nothing. So they tried to go back to sleep after that point, just super spooked. And so they figured, okay, let's just call it a night. You know, I think it was about midnight, 1 a.m, something like that. Let's just call it a night. So they all lay down and turn the lights on and try to go to sleep. And they could hear it out there, just making circles and circles again. Not as fast this time, but they can hear it just running around the trailer, whatever this thing is. And like I said, none of them got a real good look at it. It's not like they had super great floodlights, and it was a dark night. Out here in the country, we don't have a lot of light pollution, so you can't see 10 feet from your window. They never figured out what it was, but they could hear it all night just circling the trailer. I don't know whether or not they went to go investigate to see if there were tracks the next morning, but I think the boys pretty much just kind of got in their rides and skedaddled home after that. I remember my brother coming home and telling me about it immediately, and it stuck with me for a while. I'd actually forgotten about it when we were talking about spooky experiences a few nights ago. He and I just kind of sharing some things that have happened to us, and he brought that up, and I was like, oh my God, I've got to call that in. I totally forgot that happened to you. So that's just one of the weird things that's happened to us. Love the show, love what you're doing, and I can't wait for the Anza Borrego documentary. So good luck. Keep doing what you're doing. Bye.
Thank you, Chloe. I've been doing the show so long that I'm afraid my stories are starting to be repetitive. But Chloe's brother's experience sounds very similar to an encounter my parents and grandparents experienced in my grandfather's trailer park home back in the early 90s. According to my dad, at 3 a.m., something or someone was running on the roof of the trailer and/or slapping the sides. Whatever it was, Dad said it was big and very fast. Unfortunately, being around 10 years old, I slept through the entire thing. So no answers today, Chloe, but a huge thank you for sharing this experience. Now, before we gut and flay these last two whoppers, let me remind you that you can get additional info on the show, updates, and share stories with fellow listeners on our social media platforms. You can find us at Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and now Reddit. So search Monsters Among Us today and let Addie, Warren, Tony, John, Sarah, and Josh fill in the void between new episodes. Now, this certainly wouldn't be a well-rounded episode if there was not a visit from the big guy. So to remedy that situation, I turn it over to James in the state of North Dakota.
Hello, my name is James. I used to work up in the oil fields in North Dakota. It's approximately 2012, January. I'd been working there about 3 days. Never experienced the north. It's pretty intense to begin with. So I had to drive back to the shop, which was about 3 hours from our drilling location. And it was middle of the night, probably 3 in the morning, 2 in the morning, somewhere in that range. And I'm on this stretch of highway between Killdeer and Williston, and I see off in the distance, maybe about a quarter mile away, something catches my eye. It, shiny, looks like eyes off in the distance. As I'm coming up, it stops, pokes its head up and looks at me. I mean, the lights were just bright green. I mean, it was incredible how reflective they were. I thought maybe it had been an owl because, I'm from Florida. I'd seen plenty of owls. But what caught me is as soon as I was going past it, it took off running. The way it ran was very interesting, like a monkey. Plain and simple. I mean, it had its ass low. It looked like a gorilla running, like you would see in National Geographic. The whole ass was wiggling as it was running. It was using its hands to help push it through the snow. It probably stood about 4 foot tall, and it was white as could be. Didn't really get a good look at it. I didn't stop. I didn't want to mess around with it. I just kept going. And when I got back to the rig, I told my friend about it, and he immediately said, "That's a Bigfoot. That's a Bigfoot, Jim." I don't know if it was or not. I am a believer in cryptids, but anyway, that's my story. Thanks.
Thank you, sir. We've actually heard of a few North Dakota Bigfoot sightings over the years, but the mention of a white creature threw me off a bit. We've also heard of white, Bigfoot-like creatures on past episodes as well, but most of those reports came from areas like Ohio, Pennsylvania, even New England. Many, many miles from the windswept plains of North Dakota. But I'll tell you this much. Having white fur would certainly be an advantage to anything living that far north, at least in the winter months. So thanks again, James, for keeping your eyes open. We really appreciate you helping us fill our Sasquatch quota. And just like that, we've reached our final destination for the evening. The heartland of America, the Midwest, Indiana. It is in the Hoosier State that we find our next and last submitter. So here is Sam with a story I think you're all going to enjoy.
Hi, Derek. This is Sam from Indiana. I've told you before, I love listening to your podcast. On third shift, it keeps me awake, but I was not prepared for what I heard today on one of your earlier seasons. Season 1, I'm listening through from the beginning. And, okay, so you were asking back in season 1 about encounters with the mirrored men, which when I first heard the first story about it, it sent chills through my spine because I think I might have encountered them before. So I was going into work one morning, well, evening, depending on how you look at it, but it was about 11 p.m. This was last year. It was warm outside, so it was sometime either late spring through early fall. And I remember I had gone out to my car and looked down my street, and I've got a very poorly lit street, but it's not a busy street at all. And my back porch light is actually the brightest light on the street, and it kind of shines out quite a ways, but there's a major road, a highway that runs down at the end of my street, and that one is well lit. And when I was going out to my car, I'm always kind of creeped out because there's a blind wall there's a blind corner, I should say, where there's a wall of my house that when I go past it to go to my car, I can't see until I'm right there. So I'm always, jumpy and worried there's going to be something on the other side. Well, I went out and of course there wasn't, but when I went and looked down the street, there were not 3 men, but there were 2 men walking side by side, and it was eerie. The way they were walking, the best way I know to describe it, it was almost like, not quite dancing, but they were kind of walking to the left and to the right. And when one would move to the left and to the right, the other would do the exact same, and really creeped me out. There's a liquor store down the road from where I live, so I was thinking that maybe, it's 2 guys that got drunk, this maybe walking home, or there's several bars around. I thought maybe they're walking home and just, maybe doing some kind of weird walk, and that might still be the case, but I heard that story and it just gave me chills, because at the time it just gave me a weird, eerie feeling. I didn't lose any time. There was no other indication of anything out of the ordinary other than these 2 men walking side by side in this weird way that, mirrored men is the best way to describe it. And I really appreciate you having those stories on there, because I'm going to be on the lookout from now on. If that was something that, other people are witnessing, that's a pretty terrifying thing to hear. So I really appreciate your podcast, and I will definitely be more wary of groups of men walking in a mirrored fashion from here on out. Thanks, Derek.
I appreciate the entry and the vigilance, Sam. I know what everyone is thinking. This can't be the mirrored man. There were only 2 of them. Well, let me remind you that with this phenomenon, it's almost as if the rules are being written with each story that's submitted. But in this case, we've heard this detail before. Back in season 4 or 5, I can't even remember now, I shared a YouTube video by the page Beyond Creepy, in which he described a motorcycle cop's encounter with 2 strange men in the Australian outback. Here is a segment of that story to refresh your memory.
Waiting until the dust settled, Terrence was finally able to get a good look at the 2 people inside the car. He ordered them out of the vehicle. As they stepped out, he could see them clearly. Their faces were expressionless. They stood easily 7 feet tall. The strangest thing? They looked exactly alike. They were also both wearing sunglasses, although these were unlike anything Terrence had ever seen before. Terrence became increasingly more frightened as the situation progressed, though his training allowed him to maintain a straight face. As they stared at each other, the 2 men suddenly sidestepped away from the Chevy so that they were now fully exposed. The weird thing to Terrence was that when they stepped away from the vehicle, it was completely in sync, like he was watching a mirror image of the same person. Both men wore torn, mud-stained jeans held up by leather belts, and disheveled shirts neither tucked in nor out. Terrence wondered if they were playing with him. Just then, the 2 men began to walk towards him, their arms at their sides. Terrence ordered them to halt, but they didn't. They continued to advance in his direction. Feeling his life was in danger, Terrence ordered them to stop and raise their hands. As the 2 lanky figures get closer, moving in sync, Terrence can see even clearer now how they appear to be mirror images of each other. They seem unfazed by the gun. Eventually, the 2 men stepped away from each other, moving away at angles as if to get around the officer. The spindly giants calmly walk down the slope and disappear behind the dirt horizon. Seeing them gone, I'm able to breathe again. In the midst of the excitement, I had forgotten about the Chevy. Turning around, Terrence was shocked to see that the Chevy was gone. It hadn't driven away on its own, nor was it buried in the sand. It was just gone. From there, things went off the rails. Terrence remembered feeling an intense desire to vomit. He closed his eyes. When he opened them, it was now dark out. When he knelt down, it was still the afternoon. However, when he opened his eyes, seconds later, it was now nighttime. He was still in the kneeling position. God, how long have I been kneeling like this, he wondered. He eventually returned to his motorcycle and left the area.
There are some very strange details in this story that weren't included in that clip. So if you haven't already, hit up those show notes and give this video a watch. Now, I certainly cannot say that what Sam encountered was the mirrored men. After all, one of the main traits of the mirrored men encounter, missing time, was not experienced here. At least, not that Sam can remember. So if this was yet another brush with these terrifying entities, the details provided only help to expand the mystery further, rather than answer any of our long-lasting questions. But in regards to these infamous entities, I'm not all that surprised that they've managed to stay in the shadows. So thank you again, Sam, for connecting those dots. And that's going to do it for this episode. Monsters Among Us is written and produced by me, Derek Hayes. Additional support was provided by Addie Lloyd and Sarah Carter Hayes. All audio used in this production is done so under the protection of fair use. And that teeth-chattering score that you hear under each of these calls, that's Co.ag music. So thank you all for listening, and until next week.